Okay, so today we are going to go over section 3.7 on the difference between what are called a priori and a posteriori statements, which is another set of categories along with the synthetic analytic distinction on how we classify claims in logic. And we'll speak to some of the relationships between the two groups as well. Yes. That is correct. It's an extra large section. The homework is extra large. So, and it's a topic, frankly, that's a little more fun and a little more sort of broadly applicable. I mean, look, you know, you're very unlikely to go around in life benefiting yourselves by saying, oh, that's an a priori statement, that's a posteriori. You know, maybe in some sort of scientific analysis it might be helpful, but what we'll be talking about the next 2 days will be sort of broadly useful. You know, help develop some sales resistance, some bullshit resistance, things like that. So, so that's not a misprint. So, but thank you for asking about that. So yes, sections, was it 4.1 and 2? All right, let's see, what have we got here? Okay, so today's session number is 252869. All right, let's begin. So, a priori and a posteriori are two fancy Latin terms. And what they mean are after and prior to. A posteriori means after, posterior to. A priori means prior to. And the proper question here is you should say, well, wait a second, after or prior to what? And the answer is after or prior to sense experience. So this is a distinction, two categories, asking us, ooh, somebody took away my guardrail. What they refer to is the claims that are made in the statement. How would that claim, that knowledge claim, be justified or justifiable if it were true? A priori claims are claims that would be justified based on abstract reflection without the benefit of sense experience. So they would be justifiable potentially prior to sense experience. A posteriori statements are knowledge claims that would be justifiable after sense experience or based upon sense experience. Knowledge based on the five senses. So that's what the distinction is about. And of course, since we're philosophers, we have to use the Latin to make your life harder. All right, a priori knowledge has a relationship to analytic knowledge. All analytic knowledge is a priori knowledge. Why? Because analytic knowledge is knowledge of concepts. And conceptual truths are abstract truths that can be understood apart from any experience of them. So, for example, none of you have ever seen a unicorn. I mean, a real unicorn. But you all know what the concept is. The concept of the unicorn is that of a mystical white quadruped with one horn. And I know like newer versions have like blue and pink and purple and best friends, friendship is magic kind of things going on. But at least traditionally, you would have known that the concept was that of a mystical white quadruped with one horn. You can know the idea of the concept of cause and effect, and therefore the claim, every effect must have a cause. You can understand it. How do you understand that? You understand that by a priori, by understanding the concept of a triangle. By the way, here, let me disturb you a little bit. You all know you've never actually seen a triangle, right? I mean, you've never seen a triangle, and here's why. A triangle requires a shape with perfectly straight lines. And nothing in the physical universe has perfectly straight lines. Therefore, you've never seen a triangle. The claims that we make about triangles are all abstract, conceptual. The best thing you've ever seen is an approximation of a triangle. So usually I have someone in the room who thought they'd seen a triangle, and their mind is kind of blown here. So yes, this means your kindergarten teacher lied to you. Triangle, 1, 2, 3, triangle ABC. 1, 2, 3, it's a triangle. You've never seen a triangle. So all knowledge of these sorts of things is abstract knowledge. So analytic knowledge is also a priori. Now, but it's a one-way relationship. All analytic knowledge is a priori, but it is not the case necessarily that all a priori knowledge is analytic. But everything that would have been analytic is included in the a priori category, and there may be more things. All right, so let's start with that. All right, now, a posteriori knowledge, all a posteriori knowledge is synthetic. That means that anything that's analytic has to be a priori. All things that are a posteriori knowledge is going to be synthetic. Why? Because anything that you perceive with your senses goes beyond the sort of conceptual knowledge that is covered by analyticity. Now note, there is no such thing as analytic a posteriori knowledge. That would be things that are true by definition based on sense experience. And that's not the way those categories work. Things that are true by definition don't require sense experience, and things that you are figuring out by sense experience primarily are not just knowledge of concepts. One of the important debates is whether there is such a thing as synthetic a priori knowledge. That would be knowledge that goes beyond the analytic, but that is still knowable a priori. And things like claims about whether all events have causes, or claims about the ongoing nature of substances, gravity might be such an example. In any case, you should know there is a debate within philosophy on this particular topic. All right, so let's as with many of the things, I think the best way to learn is by practice and thinking through some examples. So I think this is the same list that we had for synthetic and analytic, but now we're going to discuss them in terms of a priori and a posteriori. So how would we know the claim all triangles have three angles? Good. Yeah, that's a priori knowledge. You don't rely on sense experience to learn this. Why? Well, because you would need to look at every triangle to establish this. Instead, this is abstract conceptual knowledge. How about 2 + 2 = 4? How is that claim justified? Good. Yes. All mathematical truths are abstract truths, and therefore they are a priori. Now, one of the things that confuses some people is the most effective way to teach math to young children is what? You give them like little beans or blocks or something to count. So that is the way some people learn, but that's not the way the truths are justified. That's just a sort of an oddity about human learning mechanisms. So the 94% that said a priori are correct here. How about combining drops of mercury creates one bigger drop? Is that an a priori or a posteriori truth claim? Good. Yeah, that's an a posteriori truth claim. That's something you learn sort of after the fact by experimentation, by doing. There are ants that have a system of slavery. I always thought it was more of a caste system myself. Good. Yeah, this is an a posteriori truth. You examine the behaviors of ant colonies, and then you ask yourself, does this fit into what we consider to be slave relations or not? So whether or not that's true, that would be, based on a posteriori reasoning. Some ants are parasitic, or else none are. Yeah, again, this is a priori logic. If you understand the meanings of the words, the power of the some or else none are pattern, you will realize that these is something that you can figure out just by understanding the nature of the concepts. It is a priori true. No 3-year-old is an adult. Specifically, no 3-year-old is an adult human. It works differently for some animals. A 3-year-old dog is an adult. Good, yeah, that's a priori based on, certainly if we're talking about legal adulthood, that is set by legal definitions. No 3-year-old understands symbolic logic. Again, no 3-year-old human understands symbolic logic. Don't know why this slide doesn't want to work. In any case, this is an a posteriori truth or a posteriori claim. To establish whether or not it's true, you do, an interview. You systematically examine, 3-year-olds to see if any can figure out logic. I suspect it's actually false. I suspect there are some prodigies that can. Water boils at 90 degrees centigrade on that 10,000-foot mountain. Yes, if that's true, we're going to have to try to verify that through a posteriori methods. We have to go up on that mountain
and see what the boiling point actually is. Yeah, it's not a priori, it's a posteriori. It's probably true that the math suggests it should work that way, but whether or not it's true is an empirical truth. Water boils at 100 degrees centigrade at sea level. Good, right. We talked about this last time, that that is how we that's how the centigrade scale is defined. Whatever point that water freezes at sea level will be called freezing at 0, and whatever point that water boils at sea level will be called 100. And then we take the sort of increments in between and we divide them into 100 even increments. So these are conceptual truths by definition, and therefore a priori. No uncle who is never married is an only child. Good, yes, this is knowable a priori based on how the concepts work. All swans are white. Good, that's right. You figured that out by investigating swans. And as I've said before, I'm pretty sure that's false. Every material body is spatially located and has spatial dimensions. Good, right, because we talked about this last time. Materiality is defined in terms of existing in space and therefore having spatial dimensions. And that is knowable a priori based on the definitions of materiality. Every material body has weight. Yeah, this one is a posteriori. Materiality is defined in terms of existing in space and therefore having spatial dimensions. It is not defined in terms of weight. If every material body has weight, that is an empirical a posteriori truth. And to verify it, you have to go around weighing things. This claim is probably false if you have perfect vacuum. If you can get something in perfect empty space where it is far enough from every other thing so that nothing else can pull on it, it probably has no weight. The sum of the angles of a Euclidean triangle equals 180 degrees, as your math teacher told you. Good, yes, mathematical geometric truths are a priori truths. If all Parisians are French and all French are European, then all Parisians are European. Good, yeah, a priori. And I'll remind you, as I did last time, that anything with this pattern, if all A is B and all B is C, then all A is B. Anything with that pattern is true and a priori true, even if
the things mentioned in it aren't the way the actual physical world works.
And that is because this is a hypothetical tone. So I could say if all philosophy professors are Martians and all Martians are good at math, then all philosophy professors are good at math. So even if the categories here are not accurate, the if pattern makes it an a priori truth. Because it's not claiming it's true, it's just claiming that if we define things that way, then that will be the case.
Every event has a cause.
Yeah, you would have to do an a posteriori investigation of this. Though this one's actually, there's a philosophical backstory behind this particular claim. It's actually quite complicated, but for the sake of this question, you can just mark a posteriori. Every effect has a cause. Yeah, that is true by definition based on how we define causes and effects. No such thing as an effect without a cause. We ought to treat a person not simply as a means, but always as an end in itself. All right, now this one is probably the first one that we've encountered that everyone agrees that this is an a priori claim. We don't know whether or not the claim is true, but the claim is an a priori claim. So this is probably the first one where this is a synthetic claim, but it's synthetic and a priori. Is probably the best analysis of this. So it goes beyond the definition of a person. A person doesn't mean that which we ought to always treat as an end. But there's no empirical way to verify this. So if it's true, it is a priori true, something that needs to be discernible through abstract reasoning. And if you want to see a piece of literature that claims this, you can read Immanuel Kant's Groundwork of the Metaphysics of Morals. But in any case, the correct answer here is a priori. One ought to be logically consistent. All right, now this one and the previous one had something in common. Can somebody tell me what this one and the previous one had in common? Right, they're both ought claims. And when you make a generic ought claim without tying it into something physical, measurable, and empirical, it is therefore an a priori claim because it's an ought without something that is physically, empirically measurable. Now, if I said something like, if you want to get your lunch, you should go to you ought to go to the student union and go to the dining hall. That would be an a posteriori truth, where the way to figure it out would be to actually go there and look at what happens there and see that people can get their lunch there. But if you just have this generic ought, whether it's a moral ought or epistemological ought, without tying it into this sort of measurable empirical thing, those are a priori claims. And I think those are the hardest ones I've asked you so far. Which is why oughts are difficult to figure out. God exists. An a priori truth, or an a priori claim, or a posteriori claim. Yeah, this one's a hard one, and I won't ask you this one because the correct answer is it depends on which of the many arguments out there, whether the arguments are true or false. So there are ways to argue both ways. There's ways to argue that it's a priori and true. There are ways to argue it's a posteriori and true. There are ways to argue that it's a posteriori and false. So yeah, you can have a whole graduate level seminar on whether or not this claim is a priori or a posteriori. And we don't have time for that. But Gensler likes to ask questions that that someone might find intriguing. Given that we've observed that the sun has risen every day in the past, we should believe that it will rise tomorrow. Is this an a priori claim or an a posteriori claim? All right, now this one, the way I've phrased it up on the slide, it is an a posteriori claim, but the way it's phrased in the book, it's probably an a priori claim. And in the dot, the problem is in the dot, 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 I took out the claim about reasonableness. So if you analyze it closely, so basically I dotted the most important part, so shame on me. But given that we've observed that the sun rose in the past, every day in the past, it is reasonable to believe that it will rise tomorrow. This is a claim about the definition of the word reasonableness. And because it's a claim about the definition of the word reasonableness, it is a claim about a priori abstract truth. So, for those of you that got that one wrong, that's on me. I won't do that on the test, I promise. It's an interesting one. It's a claim about whether induction is an a priori or a posteriori matter. We ought to believe what sense experience seems to reveal. Good. As we said in our earlier discussion, things that ask ought, or that refer to oughts, that don't tie it into something very directly empirical and measurable, this question of what we ought to believe, those are always going to be a priori sorts of claims. Everything red is colored. Good. Right, saying everything red is colored is a way of saying everything red is the color red. So since red is defined as a color, that what this claim is about the concept of red and whether or not includes being colorful, and it is therefore an a priori claim. Very good. Nothing red is blue. I think this one's probably debatable. This one is definitely a synthetic claim. Whether you can know this synthetic and a priori, yeah. I mean, I think my gut goes with the majority here that it's a posteriori. But this is kind of a weird one, which, again, there's whole books written about this, strangely enough. And even I, as a philosophy professor, don't want to read those books. All right, there we go. Let's see. All right, well, that's the end of chapter 3. How are we doing? We're post-exam 1. We've had chapter 3. We've talked to death about definitions and analyzing the way language is used here. How'd it go? Thoughts? Do you feel like you have this down? Do you have questions remaining? Do you have concerns? Well, let's push forward a little bit. And we're going to say something for the start of chapter 4. When we're talking about good arguments, the goal for arguments is this. The goal for arguments is that we want for an argument to be good, quote unquote. It can be either valid or inductively strong. This is a claim about the argument structure. Is it structured in the way that either assures the truth of the conclusion based on the premises, or at least makes it likely that the conclusion would be true based on the truth of the premises? And that, of course, is the difference between being deductively valid and inductively strong. Deductive validity assures the conclusion is 100% true if the premises are true. Inductive strength makes the conclusion likely to be true. Then, and validity and strength is something we talk a lot and analyze a lot in logic. What we don't analyze a lot in logic is the truth of the premises. That's what every other field is for, to help you figure out what premises are true, what claims are true, and what claims are false. Now, here's something that people miss. It's not enough for, ideally, you don't just want an argument with a proper structure, and you don't just want the premises to be true, but you want the premises to be the sorts of things that the person you're talking to will be able to perceive as true. The fact that you think they're true, well, that's great and all, but if you're trying to persuade people, you need to use premises that they will be able to perceive as true. So sometimes I'll use a premise, not because I think it's true, but because I think the person I'm talking to will think that it's true. We need clarity. We need to have things that be clearly stated. We want to avoid circularity. Remember, circularity was one of the problems in definitions where basically a term is unclear because you've only defined it in terms of itself or a portion of itself. We want to avoid ambiguity. Ambiguity is where a word often is used more than one ways, or the intended meaning is not evident based on context. And we want to avoid either emotional language or biased language. We want to avoid claims that are overly positive or overly negative. And we want arguments that are actually relevant to the issue at hand. One kind of fallacy is called the fallacy of irrelevance. And that's when somebody has given you a very good argument for an issue that doesn't have anything to do with what the current issue actually is. So as we are getting ready for chapter 4, what chapter 4 is going to be about is what are called informal arguments. And we're going to talk about the many kinds of fallacies, the many ways that forming arguments can go wrong. If I ever make my own logic book, I will illustrate each of the fallacies using a clip from The Office, because Michael Scott especially commits all sorts of reasoning fallacies all the time, which is why so again, I want you to see we're transitioning to a broader topic of good arguments, good informal arguments. We're building on what we learned in chapter 2, the idea that we need the proper structure. We want to be valid or inductively strong. And we are building on what we learned in chapter 3 with proper use of language, avoiding circularity, avoiding ambiguous multiple use of different definitions of language, and using neutral toned language. So that's where we're going from here. And that's what we'll be talking about the next 2 classes. So do the next reading, start on the exercises. There's like 60 of them. Work on them for an hour for Wednesday and then another hour for Friday. And then we'll take things from there. All right. Stay warm, be safe, don't get COVID. Sunday it's going to warm up. Winter will end. The sun will shine once again. Spring will sprung. Thank you.